I want to play something else. This is a compilation of Trump's statements from that night on a particularly dark theme.
Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. We're playing with World War III, and we have a president that we don't even know if he's... Where is our president? We're a failing nation. We're a nation that's in serious decline. This is the most divisive presidency in the history of our country. There's never been anything like it. They're destroying our country.
So on the general theme of I'm old enough to remember X, I'm old enough to remember Ronald Reagan, Morning in America, Ronald Reagan as the sunny Republican antidote to the malaise and the moroseness of the Carter years. And, you know, the Republicans are traditionally the party that says, it's all sunny uplands. America is a great place. It's the party that in recent years has embraced visible signs of patriotism. This is dark. I mean, this is really, really dark. Actually, what's going on here in his mind? Maybe nothing new, because this harks back to American Carnage. But I was really struck by this view of America as this dystopia.
Well, if you've been paying attention to his rallies, his posts on social media, his interviews, he for a while now has been painting this incredibly vivid, sort of grotesque caricature, dark, dystopian, and generally utterly fictitious of America. And so, for instance, I mean, I could take the whole show, but I'll be quick. He talks about transgender kids going to school. You send little Johnny off to school in the morning, and they come home from school having undergone gender reassignment surgery, is one. He talks about how you can't go out to get a loaf of bread without getting raped, mugged, or shot. He talks about how people are aborting kids after birth, which is actually infanticide and illegal. And he talks about, I apologize for bringing this up here, but immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating cats and dogs. And that is just the image of the nation that he is painting. He thinks it will work to his political benefit, clearly, but some of those are just so caricatured. I mean, there's parents who send their kids to school and can't get them to come home doing basic math, right? The idea that surgeries are going on in elementary schools is just absurdist.
But go on with that theme. The question I have, maybe this is a strategy. I mean, it's not a strategy for expanding the base necessarily, but it's a strategy for keeping the base.
Place. Yes. It's his familiar place, right? Like, I feel like even when you saw in 2020...
Are you saying that dystopia is his happy place?
I think dystopia is really, it's his comfortable place, right? Yeah. I mean, you go back to 2016, that cycle. When he first announced he was going to run for president, it was these allegations about Mexicans sending not their best into the country. Some of them are rapists. I mean, that is his familiar line. I think what is unusual and maybe different this time to me, particularly with the allegations about what's not true going on in Springfield, Ohio, is that he pinpointed a specific community. And as has been reported, I mean, that community is facing repercussions. There are real life
schools are being closed
right?
out of danger.
Yeah.
There's also a sense, though, that, you know, he is someone who excels when people feel like it's a change election, right? Like, there's a reason why he did not do well in a re-election race where he has to say, let's talk about how great I just did for 4 years. Like, you know, even if there were things he was pointing to around the economy that he thought were specific achievements, he couldn't inspire a sense of pride in America. I mean, obviously, it was a dark time. There was COVID in the country, so it's hard to do that. But he really does well when he inspires fear in the electorate. And his goal is to say, I'm here to be your champion against these dark forces that are amassing. And when he can't play that role, and in some ways, Harris is precluding him from doing that by not representing the previous administration, and she's kind of a new, fresh face. But for him, he wants to be a change candidate. He wants to be someone who's talking about how dark things are.
Yeah. One of the most remarkable moments in the debate came when Trump was asked if he wanted Ukraine to win in its war against Russia, Russia's war against Ukraine, I should say. And the remarkable thing is he didn't say yes, which would be the easiest, most bipartisan thing for an American politician to say, yes, I want Ukraine to win. And I want to play something for you. This is his running mate, J.D. Vance, talking at greater length about their view of this war. So listen to this.
So I think what this looks like is Trump sits down, he says to the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Europeans, you guys need to figure out what does a peaceful settlement look like? And what it probably looks like is something like the current line of demarcation between Russia and Ukraine. That becomes like a demilitarized zone. It's heavily fortified so the Russians don't invade again. Ukraine remains its independent sovereignty. Russia gets the guarantee of neutrality from Ukraine. It doesn't join NATO. It doesn't join, some of these sort of allied institutions.
So, Jerusalem, what's going on here?
Well, we saw post, the Iraq War that the whole country's mood towards intervention really turned, right? Like Democrats, Republicans across the board. But there was still a sense in most of the foreign policy establishment, most of the leadership of both the Democratic and Republican Party that we have allies in the world and there are people you should fortify with and there are people that you stand against and liberalism is still a thing that people stand for. But Trump has always been very outside of that sort of dynamic, right? He doesn't view the rest of the world that way. He sees strong men that he allies with, people like Putin, people like Xi, and people like Netanyahu. And then there are people who he thinks are weak. And that's his vision of the world. He doesn't really see value in investing in his allies. He sees NATO as not a place where American strength can be found and can be built and allyship can be found, but a place where they're taking advantage of us, right? They're making us exactly, and they need to pay in more and are not doing enough.
I do think he's also found though that there's domestic appetite for saying, okay, enough is enough, right? With sort of endless support for Ukraine. Because, this is an argument, and it's an argument you'll hear when you go out and talk to voters in certain parts of the country that they feel like their roads aren't being built or that their schools aren't sufficient or that they don't have enough money for groceries. Now, whether these things, I'm not saying if you stopped sending money to Ukrainian weapons, you would suddenly have money to build, state-of-the-art schools, but there is a frustration with high costs of things here, and people see that.
It seems, and maybe this is a failure on the Biden administration's part to explain something, but the money that's going to Ukraine is in the form of weapons that are built, made in America, in American factories by American workers, paid for by the U.S. government. But it's not to put it in a cynical sense, but it's also a jobs program. So it doesn't.
We heard this at one point from the Biden administration.
And that's the thing.
They did that for a while.
I was so confused that they didn't keep harping on that, right? Like it is such an easy to me, and maybe you guys disagree, but like easy to tell the American people, we're selling this. You guys don't understand, but we're sending these because we're also doing the jobs here. Everything we're sending over there, we're replacing here. The job
and we're not sending troops.
And we're not sending troops. Your daughters and sons are not going.
The signal difference between this and
Iraq. But that
Iraq,
message does not seem to have resonated.
Well, they didn't do it for very long, right? It popped up in a couple of speeches, and then they just moved on from it. And it to this day, it's probably one of the best arguments they have for continuing to send it for those who have issue with it.
I want to ask a question about a controversy involving something that Kamala Harris has said. Donald Trump brought it up in the debate. He said that she supports transgender surgery for immigrants being held in federal prison. There was a lot of back and forth. She doesn't believe that. But in fact, she did tell the ACLU in 2019. I think it was 2019. There was a question on a questionnaire that she supported taxpayer funding for gender transition surgeries for detained immigrants and federal prisoners. So far as I know, the campaign has not said. Or she has certainly not said if she still believes in this or if she's shifting her position on this. Eugene, Asma, what's going on with that particular issue?
I mean, she hasn't talked about it since, right?
Right.
It's not been an issue that she has talked about. There's a few issues that she's kind of changed her position on now after 3.5 years as vice president. I think largely what's happening with kind of the different vice president, the different Senator Harris in 2019 and now is that at the time, there was a Democratic Party that was kind of chasing itself to the left. And you had all of these, it was like 20-something people who were on stage, almost other than Joe Biden, who were saying, I'm going to chase Bernie Sanders. I think the party is a Bernie Sanders party. They learned the hard way that that's not the case. And so they had these different types of positions, whether it's that one or fracking or all of these others that she held at the time. I think, you would probably.
Well, she's
be
running as a
asked, but
prosecutor
and now she's running
again.
as something completely different.
And I think if and when we see her campaign address this, if they're forced to, it will fall into the "my values have not changed" bucket.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. My
think
values have
it's-
not changed,
values-
but policy-wise.
My positions have, but my values have
right.
not changed.
What she
Right.
said, what she said about immigration when she kind of came out with some different ideas on immigration is that the last 3.5 years, watching and dealing with immigration has kind of influenced her decision, which is, I think, most Americans probably will give them credit for that, but she hasn't said that about the others.
Right.
She only
And I
said
think
that.
it's worth thinking about the dynamics of a primary too, right? Because the way that this policy position came out is that the ACLU sent a questionnaire to candidates, and people had
Right.
to respond to it, and
Right.
that dynamic does just not exist in.
First rule of Fight Club: never respond to a questionnaire. In the minute that we have left, I was going to ask about Laura Loomer, but I kind of feel like just saving it for next week, and maybe that issue won't be around. I'm going to go and give you 50 seconds, Jerusalem, to talk about your book in the context of the campaign, housing crisis. How does it relate to the immigration crisis?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a big talking point for J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. They're looking for an answer because, the Harris campaign has been very clear that they're going to be focusing on policies like building more housing and providing down payment assistance. And there has to be an answer to that plays into this sort of populist rhetoric. And so they've decided to focus on the fact that, immigrants have come into this country and are contributing to demand for those houses. There's not good evidence for this. We know that actually the majority of home price appreciation happened because of Americans seeking houses and
Right.
remote work demand shifts. But, you can read more about it in my book.
That was a perfect, enlightened, self-serving pivot. I appreciate it very much, but unfortunately, we need to leave it there for now. Do read her book. I want to thank our panelists for joining us and for sharing their reporting, and to our